What has been the biggest mistake that you've made?
It's really operating in silo, I will say.
Mhm.
So, as kind of a serial entrepreneur, I've started all my own businesses basically right from graduating university. I always had this mindset of grow the company first on my own and then hire when I need it. Whereas there's such a benefit to working with other people.
Welcome to another episode of the STR Sisterhood. I'm your host, Stacey St. John, and I am so excited to spend a few minutes with you today. Now, before we jump into this episode, you know it, I'm going to read a quote to you, and it says, "Run your own race. Don't be distracted by what others are doing. Set and go after your own goals." Those truly inspiring words come to us from female entrepreneur and MIT graduate Jen Goldstone. Now, today we are talking about design and how design impacts not only your bookings, but your revenue. And joining me is Andrea Moxham, a former marketing agency owner who made the shift into doing short term rental design. And I cannot wait for you to meet her. So, without further ado, here's my conversation with Andrea. Andrea, thank you so much for being here.
Thank you so much for having me, Stacey. I'm so honored to be a guest on your show.
Well, we're going to have a lot of fun chatting. I know it. First, why don't you share with our audience who is either watching or listening a little bit about who you are and what you do?
I am primarily a virtual interior designer for short term rentals. I say primarily because I do also work with partners that install properties. So it does kind of give that full service. But myself, on my own, I am a virtual short term rental designer. I live in Ontario, Canada, and I kind of fell into this line of work. I think a lot of other short term rental designers have a similar path where they design their own short term rentals first to really get that experience and to understand kind of from beginning to end, from acquiring the property through to managing that property on an ongoing basis, what that journey looks like. So, and that's similar to my path as well. We bought some short term rentals here in Ontario. And I just fell in love with that design aspect that I thought, I need to do this all day, every day. It's like spending other people's money and, taking the risks that you wouldn't necessarily take in your own house. So, yeah, I fell in love with it and turned it into a career.
That's amazing. Now, I was going to say, I also have designed several properties, and I will say I am not a designer. I don't call myself a designer. I don't claim to be a designer. What was it, do you feel like, that excited you about getting into the world of design? And what was it that really lit you up? And maybe talk to us a little bit about your background too. Did it have anything to do with your background?
Yeah. I'll start with my background because I think that's a good segue into why I chose this as a new career path. So prior to this, I owned a marketing agency. I started out just kind of on my own as a marketing consultant back in, I guess about 2018, 2019. And then I grew that to a team of about 10 over the next couple of years. And yeah, I think that's really what gave me this strong marketing background. But within those couple of years of scaling my agency is when we started purchasing those short term rentals. And I kind of realized that the reason I got into entrepreneurship and starting my own business was to kind of escape that 9 to 5 lifestyle, which I had fallen right back into owning this marketing agency, managing a team and spending 6 hours a day on Zoom calls. I thought, this was not my plan. So I sold that agency as we started to get more into short-term rentals because I could see that vision. I could see that, I keep saying path, but it kind of just illuminated itself for me. Yeah, so I sold my marketing agency, and I think what the draw was to short-term rental design was this opportunity to really use bold decisions and go for that crazy wallpaper. You can only do that so many times in your own house before things start to look a little piecemeal and mismatched. So it allowed me to kind of flex that creativity where I wouldn't have that opportunity if I wasn't working on other people's properties. So I think that was the biggest attraction to me, but it was also this ability to kind of blend my background in marketing and entrepreneurship with short-term rental design. I see that as a bit of a gap with short-term rental designers. They know design really well, but they don't have that long history. A lot of them don't have that long history of owning a business and really understanding, beyond the design, what happens after that? How is that business going to operate once it's up and running? So I like to incorporate that into the work that I do every day. So
That's
yeah,
amazing.
honestly, it's to have the opportunity, I think, to do the crazy wallpaper and paint ceilings without having the argument with my husband about why I'm doing these things.
Girl, I could tell you so many stories. So, my husband, we're just finishing refreshing a little studio beach condo. And my husband, I love him so much. I love him dearly. We've been married for 31 years. Is that right? 31, 32, 30. We're going on 32 this year. But he has like definite opinions about throw pillow colors and what size of pillows. And I'm like, dude, you I love you, but you need to stay in your lane.
Yeah, that's so funny. I feel like spouses or partners of interior designers are either on one end of the spectrum or the other. They don't care at all. They're like, you know what you do it. And then there's the other spectrum of these partners that are like, are you sure? Like, how do you know that this is going to look good? And just don't trust that process. So,
Awesome. All right, you mentioned bold decisions. So I want to talk about that because I feel like making bold decisions is something that a lot of women in this space tend to struggle with. And I just want to I want to dive into the topic a little bit because I'm curious when you are faced with making a bold decision, what are the types of thought processes that are running through your mind? And how do you determine whether a decision is a go or a no go?
yeah, it's the work that I do upfront before making that decision that that kind of tees it up. So, for my own projects and with client projects, we're creating this story of the property. And that's looking into like the architecture, who owned the property before, why were they selling it? If we can get answers to things like that, it really helps shape the narrative of this story. And I know we hear that a lot in the short-term rental world is like the design of the property is based on the home's story. And what does that actually mean? So now that I'm doing this for clients is how I understand what that actually means. And there's, I think, a lot of factors that go into that. But shaping this story of the property and building alongside it the experience that we want guests to have, I think makes those big decisions a lot easier because you see properties where there may not be a sense of story. It's almost like anything goes, any pattern, any color goes anywhere. And that's where I think it's a bit of a disjointed experience. But if you create that narrative of, we're going with something really bold in this room, and here's why, because it's going to be a place, for example, you hear about these get ready rooms where that you do really bold wallpaper. Why are we doing that? It's because the experience that usually women have when they're maybe preparing for an event, they're doing their hair together, they're doing their makeup, they've got their mirrors all set up. They're taking a lot of photos in there. They're going to create these memories in that room. If it's kind of a flat, boring room with, these mirrors on the wall and like a neutral color, it really plays into how memorable that moment is. So I think creating that experience and drawing it back to the property's story makes those decisions so much easier because they have meaning. They're not just like, oh, this is what popped up on my feed as a new wallpaper. I'm going to go with this one.
Right. Right. All right. So understanding the story of the property is helpful. What if you're talking with a client and they have no insight into the previous owners? They are not bought in to the topic of needing a story. What
Yeah.
how would you navigate that? Because I could also envision some people going,
well, I have no idea what the story is. And why do we even need a story? And can you just source some great furniture for me? Right. So, how
Yeah.
do you deal with clients like that?
I'm making it sound like it's so easy to come up with this story, but it's not. A lot of the investors that I work with have never even stepped foot in the property that they've bought. So, how can we expect them to come up with this narrative? It's on me, and I'm doing that research into the area, the other houses on that road. How old is the home? What is the design style that aligns with when that home was built? So I'm going through this with a property right now for a client. She's never stepped foot in the house. It's a house that was built in the 90s, so it's not like a historic home where we can lean into like this really rich history. We kind of have to create that. So what I'm doing in this sense is I'm looking at the other properties on the road. I looked at Google Earth to look at what does the property look like from the end of the driveway in relation to the rest of the area, and I discovered that this property is on a ridge. So that plays a huge role in because it's not something I would have otherwise picked up on. It's not mentioned in the listing. You can't see from the interior photos that it's kind of up on this ridge. And then I looked on in Wikipedia actually for the history of the town, and it's actually got a really interesting history where they have these mineral baths. And they still exist today. You can go and see them. They're in a town called Berkeley Springs, West Virginia. Anyways, so they have these baths where centuries ago, people would come to this town under the assumption that the water in these baths was healing. So they would bring their
Mm.
family members that were like dying of illnesses. And this is so off topic. I swear I'll circle it back. That were dying of illnesses. They would come to these baths. So I thought that is such an interesting story that we need to build into this property. How can we make it feel like this spa retreat that the town once was? So it's things like that, like looking at Wikipedia, looking at competitors. I think that's also a good source of creating the narrative is understanding not necessarily the competitor's story, but looking at the reviews on those competitors' listings. People will say, I came here for a girls' weekend and we had such a nice time because XYZ.
Mhm.
Um, so yeah, I would say 90% of the time, the owners of the property, they don't have that story. You have to create it. You have to look outside of the property, the corresponding area, the towns, competitors. So it's not easy. It's not something that you can ask in like a questionnaire from a client. I've learned that you can't
Right.
just say like, what's the story of this property? They're just going to say, well, I bought it to make money most of
Right.
the time.
Right. Exactly. I want to ask you too about, standing out, having a property stand out from a visual perspective. And I'll give you a very real example. When I first started buying property in Myrtle Beach, South Carolina, which is where I'm at right now, you know, I love, love, love rehabbing properties. And so I bought here, I would buy ugly properties, rehab them, and make them truly different than other things within the local market. What I've noticed over time is as our industry has matured, so have folks in their design. So a lot of people are utilizing the same color schemes, they're utilizing the same materials, the same vendors. So in that scenario where you've got a mature market like a Myrtle Beach or a Destin or Smoky Mountains, how would you recommend folks look at standing out with more and more people utilizing designers such as yourself?
Yeah, I would say leaning into what might feel like a really narrow niche is definitely a great way to stand out in those really saturated markets where, you see this in coastal markets where everyone is leaning into that coastal theme. You see the starfish on the walls and in all of the art and the beach photography or, the sandy colors, teal. You see that same thing over and over. So I think in really competitive markets like that, choosing a niche, something it's going to feel like hyper focused, like,
Mhm.
you know, but the reality is that it's almost like, well, creating something really specific kind of allows you to make the home the destination. So for example, if someone is looking for a home in one of those saturated markets, maybe Destin, and they're looking in that particular market, they can kind of take their pick of coastal type properties in that area. But if you're looking for an ice cream themed property, which no one is like specifically looking for an ice cream themed property usually, but if you came across something like that, you are now traveling to that market to see that property. So I think that's one way, is going like really hyper niche and committing to that. Yeah, I would say that's probably
Yeah.
number one in terms of how to stand out, is to go more focused rather than broad strokes,
Yeah.
kind of looking at the market to determine how you're going to design the property.
Yeah. Interesting. Yeah. And it's interesting to hear you talk about that, because that is what we have done with this refresh we're finishing up, is making it a romantic getaway, like a couple's getaway. And it's been interesting because with that in mind, you make thoughtful choices and have different amenities and things like that. So it's been a fun experience. But
I think that's another piece too, is looking at these competitive markets that typically have all of the same amenities, is how
Mhm.
can you make that amenity different? So maybe it's not so much the decor style, because if you're coming to a beach market, you're going to expect a beachy type property most of the time. So it
Mhm.
doesn't mean that you need to do like antlers on the wall, kind of moody mountain to stand out. It's creating more of an experience around those amenities that guests can visualize themselves there.
Yep.
So sometimes that's lighting, adding interesting lighting and taking nighttime photos. Sometimes it's even styling things. So if everybody has a pool in your market, how can you make your photos of your pool stand out? So maybe it's setting up a projector and having floaties in the pool so that guests can say, okay, now that's also an outdoor movie theater in the pool. That's different than everybody else. Or maybe it's having like a little snack bar set up beside the pool with like a cooler that has popsicles in it. So things like that, where you're still offering the same amenity, you're still
Mhm.
offering that same coastal design style, but creating more of an experience around it.
Mhm. Mhm. Absolutely. And I do think, again, as our industry continues to mature, people talk about guest experience, but they're sometimes not connecting the dots into how to make a guest experience truly come to life. And you do that obviously through what they experience on the inside, but also those amenities that you offer, and putting a different twist on them, for sure.
Yeah.
I'm curious, do you feel like your background in marketing has helped you in your interior design journey?
Absolutely. And it's funny because it's not something I ever picked up on. It's my clients that will
Mm.
be like, do you have like 50 short-term rentals? How do you just kind of make some of these decisions or some of these comments that make it sound like you have done this and you're currently doing it so many times. But I think it's that background in marketing where I'm thinking beyond selecting furniture and decor and thinking about the psychology that goes into making that decision of booking an Airbnb, especially with these larger properties where it's usually one person that's booking the property on behalf of a larger group. And what are those decisions that go into even like creating a short list of those properties? I'm designing keeping that in mind. So for example, you hear about, you know, really strategically choosing those first 5 photos in your listing, because those are the ones that are going to decide whether that person booking continues to scroll or they move on to the next one. So I'm thinking about, okay, what are those 5 photos that we want to showcase first in my design? So yeah, I would say that's one piece of it. But you talked about guest experience a second ago, and I wanted to draw this back to how I think this plays into an easy example of how this directly impacts the design of a property. So here's a good example. A large group that's traveling to a property that hasn't been space planned properly. So maybe you've jammed a ton of chairs at a table. There's not a ton of walk space to walk around, seating to get from one room to the next. These are the types of things that I'm thinking about as a designer that are going to impact the guest experience, but not in a way where at the end of their stay, they're going to leave a 3-star review and call it out. They're not going to say, we loved it, but, just being in everybody's space in the kitchen and not having enough space to make supper, or, we kind of had to like deke around each other to get from room to room. That's not something that you pick up on and usually comment on, but it's something that's so directly impacted in the guest experience that is designer is thinking about. So this is kind of the marketing aspect that I'm thinking about. So I would say that's just one example of where I am thinking long beyond the design and thinking about the psychology that goes into not only looking and booking the property, but while you're there and afterwards. I know that another thing that I like to think about in my design projects that I think just kind of goes to show that I have a background in marketing is branding. I'm looking for opportunities, if we're doing an accent wall, does it make sense to add the name of the property on there? If we're adding coasters to a coffee table, we should probably be adding branding on there. When my clients are looking for a photographer, I always say make sure you're getting lots of vertical shots as well so that you can use those on social media. Create your Instagram handle now, because you know that the person who is booking is probably going to look you up on Instagram and see if if you have a name for your property, they're probably going to go look you up on Instagram to see what, see videos, because you can't see that on Airbnb, to see what that experience, what that kind of emotion is that's they're going to achieve by staying at your property. So I'm thinking about those things in my design process. And I think that just is something that goes so far beyond interior design and is more of a buyer psychology marketing type thing.
Yeah. Yeah, it's so true. And the folks that are booking the properties, we taught a whole series of classes on this at the recent short-term rental virtual summit for women, is that they the folks who are actually responsible for booking, of course, they are looking at things above the surface, meaning, okay, how many bedrooms does it have, and how many people can it sleep? But beyond that, they are having thoughts swirling around in their mind and very deep emotions underneath the surface, because especially for those large properties, they don't want to mess it up. They're afraid that they're going to book the wrong property and people are either going to talk about them, that people are going to be upset with them. Maybe it's their kids that are like, Mom, this place is lame. I can't believe you booked it. And it is a deeply emotional thing for these bookers, even though they don't realize it,
Hmm.
even though they don't realize it. So it's really, really important that we help in our listings, help folks understand that we're trustworthy, we're reliable. What is shown in the photos is actual reality. And again, that goes way beyond design, but I think it's so important to call out because that booking journey is so, so, so important. And again, yes, we want to stand out from a photography standpoint. And in the same vein, we still have to make sure that our listing is almost an insurance policy for that potential guest to know that, all right, this is a place I'm going to feel comfortable booking, right?
Yeah, exactly. And I think that's what makes designing these properties for kind of these multi-generational stays that much more challenging, because I think we're quick as designers and as short-term rental hosts to gravitate towards designing for the younger generation, the kids, doing these crazy bunk bedrooms with slides. But the people that are probably going to speak up the most if they're not having a great stay are the older generation, the grandparents. If they are having to go up and down lots of stairs to get to their bedroom, or there's nowhere to store their stuff, it's kind of finding that balance between making all of those generations happy. And that comes down to design decisions. You need to have a room, I think, with a closet and a dresser, potentially on the main level with nice high beds, nothing too low to the ground. If you're expecting to host grandparents, you need to be, considering those types of things, because they will speak up. Kids will kind of sleep anywhere. And if you can get them on board with like a crazy, funky, colorful room, great. But the challenge is in, addressing all of those generations in your design and your furniture choices.
So fun. Okay. I want to switch gears and I want to ask you a couple of questions on, if you had $1,500 and you had to upgrade a bedroom, what would you focus on first?
Paint, number one. it's such an easy way to make a big impact, and it's the first thing you notice in a room. And it's so easy, you know? I mean, like, even if you hire someone else to do the painting for you, I hate painting, so it's easy for me to say it's so easy, but I don't
Mhm.
like to paint. So I understand that frustration, but that is what I would do first. I would make sure that the rug under the bed is properly scaled. I know it sounds insignificant because this isn't something that it's not a high touch type of item, but
Mhm.
it has such a big impact on a bedroom.
Hmm.
Is a nice size rug under a bed. Like if you look at a photo of a bedroom with and without a rug, if you're not a designer, you might be like, "Okay, I can't put my finger on it," but one of these looks so much more inviting, so much more cozy, and it's often the rug. And I would say the third thing would be curtains, a really nice set of blackout curtains. This is another miss that I see is short-term rental owners will select window treatments for function over aesthetics. And
Mm.
there is a way to achieve both. You know, you can get really nice blackout Roman shades that are fabric and they add so much texture and coziness to a room. I don't know if that would eat up my 1500, but if it didn't, then I would also suggest some large throw pillows and a large throw blanket over the end of the bed.
I love
Such a
that. No,
common thing to see one or all of those completely overlooked and focus on, okay, we have a king bed, you know, we've got nightstands, we've
right.
got a dresser. So the function is there, but what's missing is um the opportunity to stand out and to make it feel a little more homey
Yeah.
by I guess what I would call soft goods.
Yeah. Now, I want to ask you about the rug because people might say, well, okay, I'll go out and buy an area rug, but you mentioned something, it needs to be scaled appropriately. How can someone determine whether or not a rug is the right size?
Yeah. Okay. So I always go larger than my rule of thumb would be to go larger than you think. But if we're talking about specifics, if you have a king bed, you absolutely need an 8 by 10 or bigger, 9 by 12 if you can fit. The other, I would say, rule of thumb would be if someone were to step off the edge of the bed on either the side or the foot of the bed, their foot needs to hit a carpet or if it needs to hit a rug, I should say.
Mhm. Mhm.
So that's another good way to, you know, kind of think about what size rug you need, regardless of the size of bed, the size of the room. You want to have it sticking out on all edges of the bed, aside from the head of the bed, which is typically up against a wall
Mhm.
anyway.
And how far under the bed should the rug go? I've seen some people have it where it's about halfway up. I'm looking back at my bed to, to say, but like halfway up, halfway down, or three quarters of the way down. Where would you place that rug under the bed?
I would say it's funny because on my website, I actually have a free download and it's rug size and place. It's a rug size and placement guide. So I show different layouts of rugs and the size that I would recommend based on the layout of the room, the size of the bed. Um, so if you're doing an 8 by 10 under a king bed, I would do about 12 inches down from the nightstands. So again, I think using that concept of if you're hopping out of bed, your feet need to hit a rug is a good indicator of how far down. Um, More so, I would say shift the rug up towards the head of the bed, if you are short on size. So if you have to do like a 7 by 9 under a queen bed, not ideal, but I would rather it be so that you can see more of it at the bottom of the bed versus, you know, being kind of hidden by nightstands, if that makes
Yeah.
sense.
Yep.
It's
No, that
it's
makes
hard to like
I,
describe without having a visual.
I get that. I get that. Okay. You also mentioned blackout curtains. Where is your favorite place to purchase blackout curtains from?
Amazon, so easy. Yeah, I have some go-to vendors on Amazon, but it's the easiest way and the usually most cost-effective way to upgrade a bedroom, you know, considering that function and aesthetic. So if you're looking for a different type of window treatment like blackout shades, then you get into custom because curtains, there's standard lengths and widths that are easy to get on Amazon. But once you get into, like something that goes inside the window frame, like a shade, it gets tricky because you have to get the exact size. So Amazon is my go-to. There are some on Wayfair that I will come back to again and again, but it's typically Amazon.
All right. I love it. All right. You also mentioned throw pillows and a throw blanket. Is Amazon your favorite source for those as well, or do you purchase from other places?
Throw pillows, typically, no, I won't get those on Amazon. You know what? One of my favorite retailers lately for really, really affordable throw pillows is, and we don't have this here in Canada, is At Home.
Oh,
Like,
yeah.
okay, I really only became aware of this retailer, I would say, in the last year. But if you are looking to, I want to say, kind of fill a bed with throw pillows, knowing that they're not going to get slept on, they're really just there for decor. Whereas, pillows on a sofa, they'll probably stay there when someone's sitting on it. Whereas on the bed, they're going to take those off. So they don't necessarily need to be the absolute highest quality. At Home has so many affordable throw pillows. Same with Target.
Mhm.
Throw blankets, I typically go back to Amazon because you can get these sizes. I always like to do a king throw blanket on a king and a queen bed. I personally like the look of a blanket that goes all the way over from end to end.
Mhm.
I just find it looks really polished. Quince is another one of my favorites for throw blankets. They're a little more higher quality. So if I'm designing a property that's a little, I don't want to say higher end, I would even say like the mid range type properties, Quince has really thick textured blankets.
And
The
the best
thing with
pillows.
Amazon pillows is that they're typically covers only, and then you have to buy the inserts. So you can get, there's a ton of variety of covers on Amazon, but just keep in mind, I have to, consider who's installing this property. If we're doing all of our throw pillow covers from Amazon, do they have time to be adding all of the inserts in? Or is this a scenario where we're better off buying ones from At Home that typically have the inserts in them and we can save that time and money?
Yeah. Yeah, for sure. For sure. You mentioned quince. How do you spell that?
Quince.
Okay.
And they've
All right.
also just launched furniture in the last year or two, which has been really, really good quality, surprisingly. So I would look up this retailer for dining tables. They've got sofas, accent chairs, coffee tables, and the bedding is really, really, really good quality. I think that's what they started
Huh.
with. And that's kind of what got them into the decor and furniture space. But one of my favorite
Sorry.
retailers lately.
What are some of your favorite places to buy area rugs?
Wayfair.
Okay.
Yeah. Wayfair in terms of those mid-range properties. So not super high end, but there's so much selection on Wayfair. And I love the filters on Wayfair. I spend a lot of time on Wayfair, so I've got to understand, how to look for the types of materials that I want. Whereas Amazon, it's a little more wishy-washy. If you're looking for, Amazon has a lot of washable rugs. I will say that. So if you're looking for something for like under a dining table or even an outdoor rug, Amazon is my source for those. But if you're looking for something for like a bedroom or a living room, Wayfair is my go-to.
Awesome. All right, another question I have, because you do a lot of virtual design. I'm curious, how do you deal with color tones not being what they really are in real life on the internet, right? So I've done this so many times where you order something and it looks like it's, I don't know, coral, and then you actually get it and it looks like it's peach, right? So how do you deal with that? Is that just something that as a virtual designer is going to be a problem and you overbuy, or is there a certain way to navigate around that?
Yeah, good question. So as a designer, I have access to this tool called Material Bank, which I use if I have time. So basically what that is I can order samples, paint, tile, fabric, and it'll come to me here in Ontario, Canada, like within a day or two. And that way I can see it. I can also send those samples directly to my client if we don't have a ton of time for, me to look at it and then for them to receive it. So I'll use Material Bank quite often. I've also gotten to know, especially like Benjamin Moore paint colors, I've gotten to know what those colors look like and how they show up in different rooms. So I would say I have kind of a subset of paint colors that I know how they present in real life. And the other thing I think with fabric, where, if you're ordering a sofa from Wayfair, you typically don't have the luxury of ordering a sample of that fabric. So it's designing in a way for that gives that flexibility, so that if it is something a little bit lighter, a little bit darker, or comes through as a completely different color, that it doesn't throw off the entire design plan. That being said, I think if you're designing a room where, let's say you are doing an orange couch, you need to keep in mind that it could look coral, it could look red,
Mhm.
it could look brown. So again, making that selection, knowing that we need to have that flexibility. So yeah, I think it comes down to a matter of getting samples where I can and designing for a way that isn't going to derail the entire room if it comes through as a different color.
Yep. That makes sense. That makes sense. All right. I want to ask you, in your journey so far as a short term rental designer, what has been the biggest mistake that you've made and how did you navigate it?
Oh, geez. I would say, and this isn't like an acute mistake, it's really operating in silo, I will say.
Mhm.
So as kind of a serial entrepreneur, I've started all my own businesses basically right from graduating university. I always had this mindset of grow the company first on my own and then hire when I need it. Whereas I wish I had done that differently in all of my businesses. You'd think that I would learn this lesson, as I start a new business. But I would say that's the biggest mistake is trying to figure things out on my own, waste so much time, waste so much money, leads to mistakes in real projects. Whereas there's such a benefit to working with other people, whether that's part of like a networking community or whether you're hiring employees, just not operating alone. I've found so much value in that the last year or two is if you surround yourself with the right people, they're so willing to help. So, even being in like these networking communities where we all say, oh, send me your ideas, like send me the project that you're working on. I'm happy to help. A lot of the time we feel shy or sheepish about saying, okay, I'm actually really struggling with this. I'm supposed to know what I'm doing, but I need some outside help. There's
Mhm.
nothing wrong with that. And the right people will help you immensely just with decision making and a fresh set of eyes. So I would say the biggest mistake is trying to figure things out on my own.
Great answer. And I couldn't agree more. That's something I feel like I shout from the mountaintops. And I think having community around you and having a shoulder to lean on, having the ability to phone a friend, as you said, if you need that perspective and guidance, not only makes things so much easier, it helps us avoid very costly mistakes and it makes it a heck of a lot more fun, right?
Yeah.
A heck of a lot more fun. So good. All right, Andrea, I want to move to the lightning round. Okay, so I'm going to ask you a few questions and just ask you to answer with the very first thing that comes to mind. First question is, where is your favorite place to vacation?
Okay. My gut instinct was to say Fort Myers. This is where my parents live. So we go down almost every year to visit them. And what's funny is it almost has nothing to do with the city and what we do there. It's the experience.
Mm,
We stay at the same property. My parents have lived there for years. It's so nice to see them again. And I feel like a kid again, when, like I now have kids to take care of. So I take care of our daughter. But when I visit my parents, it's that experience of getting to feel like the dependent again. Um, yeah, and just the memories that we've created there. One of the first years that we went down, once we had my daughter, she stuck stickers all over the windows and they left them there. And every time we FaceTime with my parents,
aw,
my dad will point them out. They're all sun faded, they're coming off. And so it's really the experience that I have going down there. I love it. We didn't make it this year and I'm craving it. It's so cold here that I wish we had gone.
That's awesome. Okay, next question. What's one place you've never been that you want to visit?
Gut instinct is to say Alaska. Yeah, I'm a bit of a wuss when it comes to cold weather. So I don't know if I'll
Mhm.
ever pull the trigger, especially because, yeah, there's a lot of, I think, drawbacks to going there, like, the time that it takes to get there and like
Yeah.
probably how expensive it is. Everything is harder to get there, but it's one area that just, it looks so beautiful. I need to suck it up and see if the family will come with me one year.
I tell you, I was in Alaska in September. I'm trying to think as late September, early October. And what was interesting was they were saying that, it can be fairly mild in the summer months. So maybe going during the summer. I mean, you know, maybe their high is 50 to 55
Yeah.
degrees, but it's not, 10 below zero.
No, I know. It's
There you
mainly mountains and icebergs. I find very fascinating, so beautiful to look at. It's not something
yeah,
that, you can see anywhere, whereas like a beach is kind of a
yeah.
beach. So yeah, Alaska's on my bucket list.
Love that. You could also do an Alaskan cruise, which I've heard is
That's
amazing.
I think what I would want to do
Mhm.
is yeah, an Alaskan cruise.
There you go. All right, next question. What's one thing you know now that you wished you knew when you started out in the world of short-term rental design?
I think that goes back to what I was talking about earlier, operating in silo.
Mhm.
I see a lot of short-term rental operators that started this business on their own and they've kind of bootstrapped everything. And I do unfortunately feel that these are the ones that are falling behind is because
Mhm.
they feel like they need to do everything themselves. Maybe they outsource cleaning, but everything else, property maintenance and the design and pricing strategy, things like that, they do themselves because they feel that they're saving money. And that's just kind of the opposite mindset that I wish I'd had with starting all of my businesses is you save so much time and money by hiring an expert or by leaning on other people rather than try to figure everything out yourself.
Absolutely. I call that knowledge hacking. I wrote about it in my book. And it's like when you can tap into someone else's experience, knowledge, mistakes, templates, tools, resources. Oh my gosh. Again, it makes things so much easier because you don't have to figure out everything on your own. And you can use proven methods. You can, again, learn from the challenges other people have had. So, totally agree. All right. Next question. What's the best piece of advice you've ever been given?
Okay, one point sticks out as something that's been relevant the last couple of days. It continues to come up as a theme that I almost wish I'd been taught earlier in life, but I'm kind of figuring out now is this concept of, without a better way to phrase it, you get what you pay for. I
Mm,
find that there is always a cost with choosing a cheaper option, whether
mhm,
that's, quality or customer service for products and for services, whether that's, warranty, there's always a cost. So, starting my own businesses and just growing up and maturing, I think I was taught to always shop around,
mm.
and look for a cheaper option, look for a discount. But now that I've, I guess, reached this point in my life, I'm discovering that there's always a cost to that. And yeah, I would say that's something that I wish I learned a lot earlier. And if I can share that advice is look beyond price, I guess. I don't really like saying you get what you pay for because that's not always the case. And I think it doesn't, I don't want to discredit people that are, or, businesses that charge less for a similar service. But yeah, that's a lesson I'm still trying to figure out is treating everything as an investment. Maybe that's a better way to put it.
Yeah. Yeah. I grew up with a scarcity mindset around money. My mom was like the ultimate couponer. She would cut out coupons every Sunday. She would only shop for things when they were on sale or she had a coupon. And it was especially exciting when they had double coupon days at Kroger because that happened in reality. But
Like Christmas.
right, exactly. And what was interesting is she never taught me to have a scarcity mindset around money. That was never her intention. And she was able to get things for our family that maybe we wouldn't have otherwise. But I found as an adult that I had a scarcity mindset around money because I knew my mom was such a frugal spender. And so it took a lot of me reframing my mindset around money. And sometimes I am a frugal shopper still, but I also find it very interesting when people spend 5 hours researching something that they can save $13 on. You know what I mean? It's like, okay, what's the value of our time? And
Mhm.
I feel like the value of our time is so, so, so important to keep in mind because we can always earn more money. We cannot always create time. Well, we can't create time at all, right? So,
No, not yet.
not yet, not yet. There you go. All right, last question. What's one thing and or person that you're grateful for today?
I'm going to say our daughter. She's 7. At first, I was thinking, someone older than me, someone who's walked the same path that I have that I can learn from. But I'm going to go with someone younger than me. She really helps ground me. I'm basically, I'm constantly working as much as I can. I love what I do so much that if it weren't for her, I would burn out so easily.
Mhm.
I'm so grateful for her because, yeah, she brings me back to earth. She helps
No.
me brush off the small insignificant inconveniences that happen throughout the day, and just to be silly again, honestly.
That's fun. What's your daughter's name?
Sadie.
Sadie. Oh, that's adorable. Yay. Well, hopefully Sadie is listening
I
or
know,
won't.
I'll have to sit her down and say, you might be mentioned in this podcast.
Exactly. Andrea, if folks want to learn more or find out more about your services, what is the best place for them to find you online?
My design website is moxieandco.ca. I'm pretty active on Instagram too. So it's just at Andrea Moxham. So you can find me on either of those.
Love it. Thanks so much for being here.
Thank you, Stacey. So nice to chat with you.